We'll be talking about new strategies for marketing and selling your consulting services in a chaotic market. We have two speakers joining us today. Michael Egan, PhD in FIMC of IMC, is president of Michael Egan Marketing. Dr. Egan has more than 40 years experience launching and establishing new markets for products and businesses. Some of his clients include Texas Instruments, McAfee, Rockwell Collins, Texas Health Resources, Baylor Healthcare Systems, and Johnson & Johnson. And our second panelist is Peter Sorensen. He's a freelance designer of teams, organizations, networks, and ecosystems. He played a key role in a set of projects that produced $4 billion in value, 4 billion with a B, for a client, according to public statements by the CEO, where he was part of an extended team doing important strategic and tactical work that achieved outstanding results. So with that introduction, I'm going to turn the floor over to Peter and Michael, and gentlemen, you can take it from here.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We're delighted to have you guys here. Tina, can you hear me okay? Okay, good. This is an interesting set of issues that we face. Looking for business, and we're calling it in the haze of chaos. That's what we see out there, and that's what we're experiencing. And I hope that we can put that frame around the issue or problem that we're trying to deal with. Today's agenda, it is there. Okay, so it is a VUCA world. The VUCA term, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. That's been a term that's been around for quite a while. There are some other terms that are similar to it, but that's basically what we're talking about in this world. The pace of technological change is mind-blowing. And especially right now, as we're kind of on the eve of AI really being a profound influence on our organizations. And we're going to see a lot of changes in the AI environment. And that has a lot of social impact. And so the amount of chaos and change that we're going to face is going to be increasing rather than decreasing. We need to understand that selling is not just closing a deal, and that selling requires marketing. Marketing and sales are related, intertwined, dependent upon each other, and we have to pay attention to both. And we really need to focus as we go through this process on what is it that is going to help us build relationships, constructive relationships with other people that are going to result in conversations that are profound with people. And in the sales process, we often talk about developing a relationship, and then through that relationship and conversations, coming up with an idea of how we might be able to help somebody, making a proposal, you know, kind of selling that proposal, closing the deal, and then delivering the business. But there's a lot of stuff that we really need to be doing ahead of that to be able to set up our business so that we're in a position that we can actually create that sales cycle and create it so that it's working well. And that's where the whole idea about marketing is so important. If you don't think through carefully and organize yourself on that end of the process, you're just not going to be able to get the flow through the sales cycle.
Look, can I just elaborate a bit about that?
Please, please, please.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Marketing differs from sales in the same sense that buying a tomato in a grocery store differs from how that tomato got there. Mm-hmm. Because in order for the tomato to get to the grocery store or even into your kitchen table, someone had to plow the field, pull the weeds, fertilize them, water them, nurture them, pull them out of the ground, cut them off the bush, put them in a truck, send them to a processing place, and so on. And finally, you get to the point where someone could actually buy it. So marketing really is a very important part of the whole process, but it's much deeper than just simply a transaction. It's something that starts with every single transaction, every single meeting that you do. And one of the things I think you'll take away from today's meeting is that today's secret sauce is agility. You need to learn how to maneuver and encounter unknown situations, and at the same time, keep your pace steady and moving forward. It's a tough, tough job.
One of the things that Michael has taught me is that he has a habit of making a client contact or prospect contact 3 times a day, at least 3 people that he contacts a day. And I think that's part of what you're talking about. There's kind of a drip irrigation concept to building those relationships. And the other R word is the word reputation. You have to, over time, be able to build a reputation in the marketplace so that you're known for something and that people have an expectation that there are things of value that you can bring. Another word for it is being a thought leader. And especially as we talk about consulting and selling consulting services, being a thought leader is critically important.
There's some key ideas behind today's presentation. Why do people buy anything in the first place? And we'll spend some considerable time trying to better understand that by summarizing the work of Robert Cialdini. The second key point is that none of us, myself included, are rational, and we don't make rational decisions. And we'll talk a bit about the work of Daniel Kahneman and several of his collaborators, psychologists, all of whom won Nobel Prizes in economics for really measuring scientifically that we are not rational in the way we make decisions. And the third critical point is to recognize how those 2 tools, the tools of understanding why people buy and why you can operate in the arena where rationality may not be part of the mix, is that we all come with assumptions and biases and ideologies. And as we all know, we live today in an environment that's rife with social, cultural, and political differences. And yet we have to maintain a steady course and provide the services that we're best at doing. And then finally, at the very end, when you get this presentation, there are several worksheets developed by one of IMC chapter's dear hosts and dear friends, Dick Morgan. He'll provide, with his permission, 3 worksheets that may help you better define exactly what value you do bring to your consulting practice.
Just one comment about that notion of ideology. As we were talking about this and I was thinking about this, there are 3 places that I see ideology playing a key and problematic role. And one of them is in politics. We have political ideologies all over the world, but especially here in the United States, we have conservative versus liberal, Republican versus Democrat. And people will adopt those ideologies to the point that they won't listen. With religion, many of us have religious beliefs. Some of us have religious practices like going to church every Sunday and being active at other church kind of things. And then we also have many friends that are a-religious or who might be atheists. And you can grab hold of your religion so tightly that you can't hear another person's perspective and beliefs as far as religion are concerned. And the third one that I see operating in organizations and creating problems is expertise. Some of us went to school for a long time, and we're very proud of going to school for a long time and of the work that we've done in our field. And I've seen conflict, ideological conflict in organizations between different functional areas of expertise and responsibility. And so these are very concrete ways that this notion of ideology can get in the way of our being able to function well. Yes, Randy,
Are you wanting to wait till the end for questions, or can we ask now?
I would like you to ask your question now.
Not only is expertise an area where there's disagreement, but there are literally some expertises that are obsolete,
Yes,
and the people don't realize they are obsolete.
yes.
So that adds to that discussion.
And I think we're all in danger, Randy, of becoming obsolete if we don't strive. And I think that's one of the merits of the First Friday book stuff that you do, is that it pushes us to stay current and not let our thinking ossify. So I think that's a point well taken. And I think one of the things we're facing right now that is that area, and I mentioned it briefly before, is the area of artificial intelligence. It's going to have profound impact on how we do business. It already is. And it's almost insidious how it's creeping in places we don't realize. And we need to understand it, and our clients need to understand it. And I have a lot of conversations with my prospect and client people about the issues around AI and how it affects them. So again, one of the things about being a thought leader is you cannot rest on your laurels and old habits. Michael is really, I think, the one who introduced all of us to Robert Cialdini and his stuff. Michael, why don't you kind of talk about that?
Sure. Actually, the chapter had a community event and brought Robert Cialdini to Dallas to provide his studies, scientific studies about what makes people buy. And rather than summarize his work, I'm going to show you a short 2-minute video.
Well, I have to turn your speakers.
Researchers have been studying the factors that influence us to say yes to the requests of others for over 60 years. And there can be no doubt that there's a science to how we are persuaded. And a lot of this science is surprising. When making a decision, it would be nice to think that people consider all the available information in order to guide their thinking. But the reality is very often different. In the increasingly overloaded lives we lead, more than ever, we need shortcuts or rules of thumb to guide our decision-making. My own research has identified just 6 of these shortcuts as universals that guide human behavior. They are reciprocity, scarcity, authority, consistency, liking, and consensus. Understanding these shortcuts and employing them in an ethical manner can significantly increase the chances that someone will be persuaded by your request. Let's take a closer look at each in turn.
So the first universal principle of influence is reciprocity. Simply put, people are obliged to give back to others the form of behavior, gift, or service that they have received first. If a friend invites you to their party, there's an obligation for you to invite them to a future party you are hosting. If a colleague does you a favor, then you owe that colleague a favor. And in the context of a social obligation, people are more likely to say yes to those that they owe. One of the best demonstrations of the principle of reciprocation comes from a series of studies conducted in restaurants. So the last time you visit a restaurant, there's a good chance that the waiter or waitress will have given you a gift. Probably at about the same time that they bring your bill, a liqueur perhaps, or a fortune cookie, or perhaps a simple mint. So here's the question: does the giving of a mint have any influence over how much tip you're going to leave them? Most people will say no, but that mint can make a surprising difference. In the study, giving diners a single mint at the end of their meal typically increased tips by around 3%. Interestingly, if the gift is doubled and 2 mints are provided, tips don't double. They quadruple, a 14% increase in tips. But perhaps most interestingly of all is the fact that if the waiter provides one mint, starts to walk away from the table, but pauses, turns back, and says, "For you nice people, here's an extra mint," tips go through the roof. A 23% increase influenced not by what was given, but how it was given. So the key to using the principle of reciprocation is to be the first to give and to ensure that what you give is personalized and unexpected.
The second universal principle of persuasion is scarcity. Simply put, people want more of those things they can have less of. When British Airways announced in 2003 that they would no longer be operating the twice daily London-New York Concorde flight because it had become uneconomical to run, sales the very next day took off. Notice that nothing had changed about the Concorde itself. It certainly didn't fly any faster, the service didn't suddenly get better, and the airfare didn't drop. It had simply become a scarce resource, and as a result, people wanted it more. So when it comes to effectively persuading others using the scarcity principle, the science is clear. It's not enough simply to tell people about the benefits they'll gain if they choose your products and services. You'll also need to point out what is unique about your proposition and what they stand to lose if they fail to consider your proposal.
Our third principle of influence is the principle of authority, the idea that people follow the lead of credible, knowledgeable experts. Physiotherapists, for example, are able to persuade more of their patients to comply with recommended exercise programs if they display their medical diplomas on the walls of their consulting rooms. People are more likely to give change for a parking meter to a complete stranger if that requester wears a uniform rather than casual clothes. What the science is telling us is that it's important to signal to others what makes you a credible, knowledgeable authority before you make your influence attempt. Of course, this can present problems. You can hardly go around telling potential customers how brilliant you are, but you can certainly arrange for someone to do it for you. And surprisingly, the science tells us that it doesn't seem to matter if the person who introduces you is not only connected to you, but also likely to prosper from the introduction themselves. One group of real estate agents were able to increase both the number of property appraisals and the number of subsequent contracts that they wrote by arranging for reception staff who answered customer inquiries to first mention their colleagues' credentials and expertise. So, customers interested in letting a property were told, "Lettings? Let me connect you with Sandra, who has over 15 years experience letting properties in this area." Customers who wanted more information about selling properties were told, "Speak to Peter, our head of sales. He has over 20 years experience selling properties. I'll put you through now." The impact of this expert introduction led to a 20% rise in the number of appointments and a 15% increase in the number of signed contracts. Not bad for a small change informed from persuasion science that was both ethical and costless to implement.
The next principle is consistency. People like to be consistent with the things they have previously said or done. Consistency is activated by looking for and asking for small initial commitments that can be made. In one famous set of studies, researchers found, rather unsurprisingly, that very few people would be willing to erect an unsightly wooden board on their front lawn to support a Drive Safely campaign in their neighborhood. However, in a similar neighborhood close by, 4 times as many homeowners indicated that they would be willing to erect this unsightly billboard. Why? Because 10 days previously, they had agreed to place a small postcard in the front window of their home that signaled their support for a Drive Safely campaign. That small card was the initial commitment that led to a 400% increase in a much bigger but still consistent change. So, when seeking to influence using the consistency principle, the detective of influence looks for voluntary, active, and public commitments, and ideally gets those commitments in writing. For example, one recent study reduced missed appointments at health centers by 18%, simply by asking the patients rather than the staff to write down appointment details on the future appointment card.
The fifth principle is the principle of liking. People prefer to say yes to those that they like. But what causes one person to like another? Persuasion science tells us that there are three important factors. We like people who are similar to us, we like people who pay us compliments, and we like people who cooperate with us towards mutual goals. As more and more of the interactions that we are having take place online, it might be worth asking whether these factors can be employed effectively in, let's say, online negotiations. In a series of negotiation studies carried out between MBA students at two well-known business schools, some groups were told, time is money, get straight down to business. In this group, around 55% were able to come to an agreement. A second group, however, were told, before you begin negotiating, exchange some personal information with each other. Identify a similarity you share in common, then begin negotiating. In this group, 90% of them were able to come to successful and agreeable outcomes that were typically worth 18% more for both parties. So to harness this powerful principle of liking, be sure to look for areas of similarity that you share with others and genuine compliments you can give before you get down to business.
The final principle is consensus. Especially when they are uncertain, people will look to the actions and behaviors of others to determine their own. You may have noticed that hotels often place a small card in bathrooms that attempt to persuade guests to reuse their towels and linen. Most do this by drawing a guest's attention to the benefits that reuse can have on environmental protection. It turns out that this is a pretty effective strategy, leading to around 35% compliance. But could there be an even more effective way? Well, it turns out that about 75% of people who check into a hotel for 4 nights or longer will reuse their towels at some point during their stay. So what would happen if we took a lesson from the principle of consensus and simply included that information on the cards and said that 75% of our guests reuse their towels at some time during their stay? So please do so as well. It turns out that when we do this, towel reuse rises by 26%. Now imagine the next time you stay in a hotel, you saw one of these signs. You picked it up and you read the following message. 75% of people who have stayed in this room have reused their towel. What would you think? Well, here's what you might think. I hope they're not the same towels. And like most people, you probably think that this sign will have no influence on your behavior whatsoever. But it turns out that changing just a few words on a sign to honestly point out what comparable previous guests have done was the single most effective message, leading to a 33% increase in reuse. So the science is telling us that rather than relying on our own ability to persuade others, we can point to what many others are already doing, especially many similar others.
So there we have it, 6 scientifically validated principles of persuasion that provide for small, practical, often costless changes that can lead to big differences in your ability to influence and persuade others in an entirely ethical way. They are the secrets from the science of persuasion.
Cialdini came to visit us here like 12 years ago, Michael just said, and I still am a little bit baffled by those principles, and I'm still trying to figure out how to use them. But I've found that where I do use them, it helps. And one of the things I like about it is that it's scientific approach to an irrational process. And we'll talk about the irrationality of our thinking and deciding in just a minute. Michael, you had another principle to add.
Well, you'll notice that we've scratched out 6 and put 7. In 2016, Cialdini wrote another book. And in it, he describes how framing your persuasiveness in the right environment can increase the effectiveness of your request manyfold. He calls it persuasion. And early in the book, he recognizes that there was another factor that seemed to tie all of these together. In fact, in his own words, he said it was there all along. And that is a principle he calls unity, which is a sense that we're all in this together and that you are more persuaded to act if you are in a family or a tribal or in a consensus with those around whom you agree on all of those factors. I would urge you in the strongest possible thing, if you want to take one single lesson from today's session, buy Persuasion and read it carefully, because it's a tremendous and ethical way to really improve your ability to work in a chaotic, volatile, uncertain, complex environment. It's a wonderful book. And Cialdini also has a website that you might want to subscribe to. And that's that of that.
Please understand that what we're saying about these two books is that you need to study them. An initial reading is not going to be sufficient because there's some complicatedness, some complexity here, and you have to figure out, how am I going to apply this in my setting today with the relationships I'm trying to build and the projects I'm working on and so forth. So study. This is an area where we're going to have to be constantly working to learn what we need to do.
Well
Tom?
said, Peter. I want to add a comment here. And that is, one of the things that is so powerful as a communication tool about your practice is storytelling, to get away from the facts. What does storytelling have to do with these principles of persuasion? It's authority, because what it does, by telling the story, you're letting someone else give the example of the things that you do. And I'd like to remind you that probably one of the most powerful prospecting tools you might use is the magic 6 words, originally proposed by Cox Farrell, another fellow at the Institute from San Francisco. And here are the 6 words. You know what it's like when. Tell the story of what you do and then why it works. I'll give you mine. You know what it's like when a company faces a new market and they don't know what their competitors are going to be like, or how to practice or how to price their products? Well, I find out and then I build strategies so they succeed. You know what it's like when. State what you do as a story. It's an incredibly powerful story to launch your own practice.
Tom, you had
Well, I'm kind of make a comment. I came from engineering where you want to buy a product, you figure out the competitor, you bring them all in, you do an exhaustive evaluation of them, make a decision. So when I created my own company to produce a product, I found out that most of my customers have no idea what it does, how it does what it does. And so for a long time, I'm like, well, why are they buying it? It's like, I couldn't compute that. And I think it's just, we got along with them, they work well together, stuff like that. But the fact is, they have virtually no idea what it does.
Yeah. I think
And
that's,
that makes perfect sense. Right?
Yeah, doesn't it?
yeah, I mean,
Pete, could you repeat
it-
what
one
he
of the
said?
things
Because we
that
really
Cialdini
can't hear him online.
emphasizes is
Can you
that this
repeat
needs to
that?
be used ethically, because it can be used unethically.
Yes.
And he's been just very keen about it. Every time that I've heard him talk, he's mentioned that, and that's consistent with IMC, right? Because we have a code of ethics, and especially if you're a CMC, you're committed to living that. Now, one of Michael's secret weapons is that when he puts a proposal in for somebody, he always puts the IMC code of ethics in there as an addendum to say, this is how I operate. Authority. And there are a lot of people in IMC that do that. And I recommend it highly. By the way, one of the things I tell people is that you need to love your clients. If you genuinely love and care for and have admiration and respect for your clients, you're going to want to do what's in their best interest. And what Cialdini is saying is, if you really want to do what's in their best interest, you need to be using these principles and approaches of influence and persuasion to help them do what's in their best interest. Randy, please.
This also reminds me of the book Building a Story Brand, which is about the story of the client's journey. And you are the guide to help them be the hero of their own story. I'll put my synopsis handout in the chat.
Oh,
for
thank
that
you.
book.
Thank you very much. Okay, so love your clients. Now, let's talk about how irrational we are. And in order to cover that topic, we will invite Michael, who has a PhD, which is a very rational thing, in science, which is really rational stuff, to explain to us that really, you're not rational.
I'm not.
Yeah, I wasn't personal feedback, Michael.
I see. Daniel Kahneman is a psychologist, and he once performed as a very rigorous experimental psychologist. And he once performed an experiment that's been repeated dozens and dozens of times. In his experiment, people are sitting around a table like we are here in this room, and they are focused on solving a particularly difficult problem. While they are working on this, trying to solve it, a man dressed in a gorilla suit walks behind them back and forth. No one has ever seen the gorilla. His book, which was written in conjunction with Amos Tversky, won a Nobel Prize, and its thesis really defines thinking not from a neurophysiologist's point of view of the temporal lobes and the various portions of the brain, but as a functional. And he defines it as two different parts. There is the slow thinking part of your brain and the fast thinking part of your brain. The slow part is what the subjects in this experiment with the gorilla were doing. They were focusing so strenuously, so intensely on finding a solution that they later solved, that they ended up creating rules. And the rules are the fast part. What his work shows is that we make rules incorrectly. And we make lots of mistakes. He calls them the heuristic errors we make. And I would urge you to read the book. It's a little thick. It's well done. The last 30 pages are the scientific article he actually wrote demonstrating his principles. The other 500 pages are lots of details. But I would also encourage you to read Michael Lewis's book called The Undoing Project. The Undoing Project, written by Michael Lewis, is a very readable book, and it focuses on both Kahneman and Tversky's work and how they came to these understandings. It's quite readable. You'll get the same information, and then you might want to pick up Thinking Fast and Slow and read it more carefully. A third individual, Richard Thaler, also won a Nobel Prize for taking this one step further. The bottom line is that we are not rational, and we make mistakes in how we think. We make judgments that can really influence not only you, but how you interact with your clients. And if you understand those and you understand your own weaknesses and misunderstandings, as we talked at the very beginning, then you will be much more successful in reaching a successful sales with your client.
This needs to be studied carefully also. So we're talking about two bodies of knowledge about thinking, persuading, influencing, that we need to gain mastery of in order for us to be able to thrive in the context in which we find ourselves today, the context that is chaotic. Because if we don't have sound thinking approaches, and if we only approach things from a habitual point of view, we're going to not succeed. Now, okay, Pete and Michael, that's really cool stuff. That's really fancy. And you've given us a reading assignment to read 1,000 pages of difficult to understand material. Oh, boy,
Oh,
is that a recipe for disaster?
Hey,
So we
Pete,
want to add one more
Pete.
layer to the recipe of disaster.
hey, Pete, we're
And-
getting an
And this
echo.
is, yeah, more homework.
We're getting an
How
echo.
do you organize your practice? This is really about how you project yourself into the marketplace. And it's based on our good friend, Ken Lizotte, who is a member of the Boston IMC group. And he's written a couple of books that are really quite good. The Speaker's Edge and the other one. I don't remember the other one's name. But in those two books, he talks about the 5 pillars of thought leading. If you want to be a thought leader, then y'all got to do this stuff. And so,
Yeah, I was gonna say his second book is about thought leadership, and incidentally, Ken is a sponsor of our roundtables. You'll see us promoting him again in future months, so I'm sure he'll appreciate the plug today as well.
yeah, Michael talked to him and he said, "Oh, good, do it, but just include my email address." So he's working the projecting into the marketplace all the time. He's a delightful person, a little bit obnoxious at times, but he has spoken to our chapter twice, and each time it's been knock it out of the park kind of thing. So okay, so he says, publish your ideas, speak to groups, develop fresh thinking. That's kind of like research, uncover new ideas. And right now, one of the areas for fresh thinking is about artificial intelligence and how you employ it. And employ it in each one of the areas of expertise that we have. It applies very much to everything that we're doing. And then creatively leverage the internet and vigorously use the media. Okay, so those are 5 principles, 5 ideas, 5 approaches. We want you to apply these things. Michael and I have both organized our practices around these ideas. If you go into my Finder area, my file structure, and go into the business part, there's an area that's called 5 pillars. 5 pillars of thought leading. And there are then file folders for each one of these 5 items. And then there's one about the principles of thought leading. And then there's another one, the 7th one, that maybe is the most important. It's about what are your goals? What are your action plans in these 5 areas? And so every year I go through my annual seance of planning for the next year, and I pull out my 5 pillars and I look at afresh, I look at anew at what's going on in the marketplace. What does the chaos look like right now? And how do I need to do each one of these pillars differently this year? And I'm kind of coming out of the planning cycle right now at the beginning of 2024. And what I've noticed is that I often kind of do a brainstorming kind of thing and put a whole bunch of ideas down, but I don't have bandwidth to do it all. And so I have to select, I have to pick and choose what I'm going to do in each one of these areas. 2 years ago, I decided to turn off my website. So I still own the domain. The website is still there in the ether in my own WordPress location. But it's not turned on so that people have access to it. Because what I found was I was spending too much time on it for the return on investment. And my clients and prospects were not telling me that it was valuable. Now, 10 years ago when I started it, people would give me feedback of, it was good to get to know you that way. But I see the internet changing. Now, I'm not recommending that you turn off your website if you have one, or I'm not saying don't create one. What I'm saying is I'm trying to illustrate that what I try to do is every year customize the actions based on what's going on around me and the bandwidth I have and what I need to focus on. So my focus has changed, and I'm focusing on one part of the chaos right now, which is artificial intelligence. And so that was not helping me. Now, it may be that in 6 months, I'll say, okay, I've got to do something differently and I'll turn it back on, but not today. And so please apply this to yourself. Help it be an architecture of your thinking, and especially for planning and action, putting it into action. Okay, we probably ought to go to a next slide. I'm in, oh, yes. Okay. The idea of a pivot is really important because you are going to have to pivot all through your career and all through your life. You're going to go through phases where you move with one thing as an emphasis to another. Michael's life has been one big pivot or series of pivots. So, Michael, would you talk about your movement from French horn to healthcare?
Yeah, there I am, right there on the back row. First horn, had an opportunity to go to Juilliard and become a professional French horn player. There was something in me, I'm not sure exactly what it was. It says, maybe not. And instead, I decided to take an academic route. So I went to the University of Pennsylvania. Didn't have a very big scholarship, ended up working 3 jobs concurrently, including selling encyclopedias on Long Island in the summers. Won a motorcycle on that, provided transportation, another pivot, and ended up publishing not 1 but 2 scientific papers. Fell in love with science and continued that for a dozen or more years. Became a neurophysiologist. I had appointments at Princeton University, the University of Texas at Austin, Lawrence University, and St. Edward's University. And then things changed again. New technology emerged in the medical device business, something called zoogmatography. You probably remember that one, don't you? No, nobody did, because there was a big political ballot in the radiology business, and nuclear medicine said, we want that technology. It was called nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. And they said that nuclear belongs to us. Oh, no, said the radiologist, belongs to us, we make pictures. They won, they called it just MRI. Well, the problem is that magnetic resonance does not make pictures with any kind of light you can see. An X-ray salesman back then knew how to make pictures and talk about how opaque or not the images were, but they didn't know how to talk about spectroscopy. Well, a physiologist uses that as stock and trade. All of a sudden, a new world opened up to me, and I became an expert in some of these new technologies, and I'd go around all over the country talking about magnetic resonance spectroscopy. It's a symphony, by the way. They send sound waves into your body. Your molecules sing back. They're actually picked up by a Crown brand name speaker system, and they convert those sounds into pictures. It's kind of like sitting in an orchestra and listening to the French horns or the violins or the cellos. At any rate, so I did that for a while. Ended up being pretty involved in software and things like that. Another pivot came in. I got recruited to run a pharmaceutical company. I didn't know much about pharmaceuticals. I knew a lot about chemistry and all that kind of stuff. And I ended up running a pharmaceutical company called Zadol Systems over the US. And change happened again. My boss, who was Canadian, asked me for $50,000 worth of my revenues for a project he had in Canada. I said, no way, I got to make payroll. I've got employees all over the country. He said, you're fired. I said, oh, thanks. So by about this time, I recognized something very important, and that is physiology is how living things work. Marketing is how business works. And much to my delight, all of the mathematics are identical. In fact, the textbook that I now use when I do statistical work is called biometry. And it's the same, the formulas are the same, they just simply have different variable names. And I began a career in consulting. First jumped into telecom industry when it was hot here in Dallas. and became a real expert in telecom technology. And I could say all of those 10-digit words. In fact, I had on my desk a calendar of all of the little acronyms that telecom had. Nortel was my biggest client. They went bankrupt. It was a disaster. I focused on healthcare, which I had some experience in nonetheless. And I've been doing healthcare, medical devices, technology. But I think the story that I really want to share with you is that technology is always going to change. Things are going to change. Where you are in that stream is going to change. And it's important for you to be able to recognize what your strengths are. For mine, it's knowing how and being curious about how things work. And I think that's the bottom line. You have to be agile and you have to learn how to pivot. We've got about 5 minutes, so I want to
Next slide.
pivot
please.
a little bit here. Do you want to go through these?
Yes, let me just, one of the emphases that we're trying to highlight here is, like Michael said, technology is changing, the world around us is changing, it's chaotic, and you've got to be able to be agile and pivot to keep up with it. And out of the Davos meeting, World Economic Forum this year, some new ideas came out, and McKinsey just published an article that talks about what they see as kind of the 10 things that are really important coming out of Davos. And for me, as I was looking at that, I was thinking, wow, what are the areas that I think I might be interested in working in, and that might be an area that would allow me to put an emphasis or a little bit of a pivot in my practice and be able to thrive. And so the 4 that I saw are the third one, which is artificial intelligence. And so I'm working on human-centered artificial intelligence. The next one is net zero or sustainability. And in the last year and a half, 2 years, I've read 5 books on net zero sustainability about how to design organizations so that they can have net zero. And there's some wonderful work out there, but it's required me to read these 5 books and talk to a lot of people about. And then there's the one about women's health. Women's health is a big deal, and it includes abortion, but it's not limited to that. And basically what they're saying coming out of Davos is the whole idea of women's health and promoting women's health so that women can participate in our economy and in our organizations and our society is one of the most important things. And if you get locked up on abortion and you have a ideological position about abortion, you're going to miss the broader issue about women's health. And so you got to be really careful to not let your personal ideological, whether it's political or religious or by expertise, get in the way of you seeing what could or should or needs to be done in this area. And then the 4th one was performance and diversity. And there's a lot of ideological concern about diversity. You know, we in Texas have done some really, in my view, ideological point of view from Pete, some really stupid things by eliminating DE&I from our universities, because there are some great programs that have really had a powerful impact on our universities coming out of that. And so pay attention to these ideas of diversity and performance. Yes.
Yeah, there's a reference when you get the slide deck to these 10 things. I want to add just one slight postscript. One of the 10 is the role that India will play in international commerce. I had the pleasure of visiting India last fall, and I was really stunned at some of the public works that they have done. Number one, in New Delhi, there are no gas-powered engines allowed by law, and they have gone completely to liquid natural gas. It's astonishing. And the change in the atmosphere is amazing. All right, well, you can find the rest of these. They're really all worth looking at, big trends. I think I want to conclude with the words of wisdom from Calvin Coolidge. Nothing in the world will take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent.
And then so kind of wrapping our part of it up here is we've talked to you about some things we think we all need to be persistent on. And persistent in terms of learning and persistence in terms of the way that we organize ourselves to set ourselves up so that we can successfully engage with our prospects and clients to get business and execute the business and have prosperity for our clients as well as for ourselves in this mess of a context that we're in.
Yeah, thank you, Michael and Peter. Very eye-opening. Appreciate your presentation. We're at the hour. Are you available to take a couple questions?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, fantastic.
Before we do that, I want to point out that in the slide deck, there's an appendix with a bibliography for the reading, and there are embedded Excel worksheets that have the exercises that Dick Morgan provided for you to help define what value you actually bring to your clients. It's a really wonderful exercise. They're self-explanatory. And then there's two other Word documents that talk about a Pete recommended book, Ignorance, How It Drives Science, and Thought.
Great.
Questions?
Floor's open for questions.